0325 hours. The Strait of Hormuz, 8 nautical miles southwest of Larak Island. The water is black and warm, and somewhere beneath 40 feet of it, something is hiding. This is a hypothetical scenario, built from real systems, real physics, and real Iranian submarine doctrine, for education and understanding of how modern naval deterrence actually works. Here is what makes this night different from every other night on the CENTCOM blockade line. A Ghadir-class minisub, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, roughly 29 meters long, displacement under 150 tons, has just threaded itself underneath the hull of a 280,000-ton VLCC supertanker. Not near it, under it, pressed into the acoustic shadow directly beneath 300 meters of loaded steel, riding the tanker's own cavitation noise like a cloak. And for the next 6 minutes, the USS Monterey, a 9,000-ton Arleigh Burke-class destroyer on station 3 miles to the north, has no idea it exists. What's most surprising about this case isn't the audacity of the move, it's how close it almost worked. Here is where this is going. An MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, a $30 million aircraft running a single dipping sonar array, is about to read a $20 million submarine through the one gap in its acoustic armor. But to understand why that matters, you need to understand the game the Ghadir is playing, and why the ocean itself is supposed to be on its side. 10 ships turned back. That is the tally on the CENTCOM blockade board as of 0300 hours. 10 vessels that tried to run refined petroleum north through Hormuz toward Bandar Abbas in the previous 48 hours, turned around by U.S. Navy surface presence and P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft working the northern approach. The blockade is working, which means the pressure in Tehran is building. And when the pressure builds in Tehran, the IRGC Navy does not send diplomats. The Ghadir program is Iran's answer to a specific problem. How do you threaten a superpower's fleet when you cannot match it ship for ship? You build something small enough to hide, cheap enough to lose, and lethal enough to matter. The Ghadir class displaces around 120 tons submerged. It carries 2 heavyweight torpedoes and has a crush depth of roughly 200 meters. In theory, here is the problem with 200 meters of crush depth tonight. The Strait of Hormuz at this position is 60 meters deep. That is the entire water column. There is no deep layer to run to, no thermocline to dive beneath, no dark trench to disappear into. The Ghadir is a deep-water predator trapped in a bathtub. The only move available is to hide, and the only thing big enough to hide behind is the tanker. Think of it this way. The destroyer's hull sonar sends acoustic energy in every direction beneath the ship and reads back a picture of the water column. But a fully loaded VLCC creates so much acoustic noise, propeller cavitation, engine vibration, hull flexing under 280,000 tons of crude oil, that the sound picture directly beneath it is white noise. Pure interference. The Ghadir's diesel-electric signature, already quiet on electric motors, drowns in that churn the way a whisper drowns in a rock concert. The Ghadir's commander knows this. He has spent 6 minutes making micro-adjustments, in depth, and heading to stay centered under the tanker's keel, matching the supertanker's 8-knot transit speed exactly. His diesel is shut down. He is running on battery. His signature is, by every measure the Monterey's AS QS-53C Bosa can produce, invisible. Put yourself in that control room. 29 meters of steel, 6 crew, 60 meters of water above the bottom, 40 feet of it between your sail and the tanker's keel. The ship you're hiding under is the loudest thing in the strait. Your hands are on the trim controls, and you genuinely believe you are going to make it through. The break does not come from the Monterey. It comes from 800 feet above the water and 140 meters off the tanker's port quarter. Seahawk 7-1 has been on station for 19 minutes, working a sonobuoy field that the P-8A Poseidon dropped 2 hours earlier along the southern tanker lane. 8 sonobuoys, passive listening. The field was laid on a standard prosecution pattern. Overlapping detection circles, roughly 2 nautical miles of coverage, and for most of the night it has been reading exactly what you'd expect. Tanker noise, surface chop, biologics. The audio from buoy positions 3 and 6 has been particularly dirty. Too much surface turbulence near the channel edge. But the Seahawk's crew is not relying on the buoys alone tonight. At 0321, the MH-60R begins its dipping sonar approach, lowering the Aegis 22 array on a cable down through the warm surface layer, 40 feet, 60 feet, 80 feet. This is the key move. Here is the physics that changes everything. The Strait of Hormuz in June has a pronounced thermal layer sitting between roughly 40 and 70 feet of depth. Above it, the water is warm from surface heating. Below it, cooler. Sound travels at different speeds through water of different temperatures, and this thermal gradient acts like a mirror for acoustic energy. It bends and reflects sound waves, creating an acoustic shadow zone below it that hull sonars struggle to penetrate. The Ghadir's commander is using that shadow zone as his ceiling. The tanker's noise covers him from above. The Thermocline shields him from the side. He is caught between two layers of acoustic protection, but a dipping sonar cheats. The IRGC-22 goes through the Thermocline. It does not look down at the shadow zone from above. It looks across it inside. It is the difference between trying to see a fish through the surface reflection and putting your face underwater. Once the array is below the thermal layer, the acoustic picture changes completely. What's most surprising, and I spent a long time looking at how the IRGC-22 performs in shallow water warm strait environments, is that the Thermocline itself becomes a targeting aid. Because the sub is hiding in the shadow zone, it is also constrained to the shadow zone. It cannot rise without entering the tanker's keel zone. It cannot dive. There is no depth. It is, acoustically speaking, pinned. At 0324, the AQS-22 reads a faint tonal, a low-frequency harmonic at a characteristic frequency that does not match the tanker's propulsion signature. It is not loud, it is not a confident contact. The acoustic intelligence system on the Seahawk flags it at low confidence. Possible diesel machinery noise bearing 275 range approximately 800 meters. 800 meters is well within the tanker's acoustic shadow. The bearing line runs directly under the hull. The contact is so embedded in the background noise that the system's automated classification rates it as ambiguous. Possible biologic, possible mechanical, possible sub. The Seahawk's acoustic sensor operator makes a call. She cross-references the bearing with buoy positions 3 and 6, the two buoys that have been reading dirty all night. She pulls the raw frequency data, and there, buried in the interference, is the same tonal, same frequency, different angle. Triangulation puts the contact at the tanker's port quarter, 45 feet deep, moving at 8 knots on a heading of 030. That is not a biologic. Biologics do not maintain a constant 8-knot course heading 030 for 19 minutes. Here is the thing that doesn't sit right, even now, thinking through this scenario. The Ghadir commander was not making a mistake. His tactic was sound. He was inside the acoustic shadow. He was below the Thermocline. He had matched the tanker's speed and heading perfectly. Against a hull sonar prosecution, he would have made it through. The gap in his plan was not the destroyer. It was the helicopter. And he had no way to know the helicopter had dipped below his shield. At 0326, the MH-60R Seahawk radios Monterey, classification, probable Ghadir-class submarine, position 800 meters off the port quarter of the VLCC, depth approximately 45 feet, course 030, speed 8 knots, confidence medium-high, recommended action, active prosecution. The Monterey's commanding officer has 30 seconds to make a decision. This is a deterrence operation, not a combat operation. The blockade's value is not in sinking a submarine. It is in demonstrating that the submarine cannot operate undetected. The prize tonight is not a wreck on the bottom of the Strait of Hormuz. It is the acoustic recording, now being logged by the Seahawk's mission computer, the Ghadir's tonal signature, its machinery noise, its propulsion harmonics, its precise acoustic fingerprint is now on file. Every U.S. Navy asset in the region will carry that signature. For the operational life of that submarine, it is no longer anonymous. But there is one more step. Here is the part that seems backward until you understand deterrence doctrine. The Monterey does not fire. The Seahawk does not drop a Mk-54 torpedo. What happens next is the military equivalent of placing your hand on someone's shoulder in the dark and saying, "I know exactly where you are." At 0328, the Seahawk drops an active buoy, a single decast sonobuoy, 70 meters ahead of the Ghadir's projected track. The buoy hits the water, activates, and sends a single active pulse into the water column. Inside the Ghadir's control room, the sound arrives like a thunderclap in a phone booth. A clear, sharp, directional ping, and then its echo bouncing off their own hull, returning to the source with their exact position encoded in it. There is no ambiguity about what just happened. That pulse says, "We have your bearing, your depth, your speed, your solution. If this were combat, you would already be gone." That single active ping is a more devastating weapon than any torpedo the Seahawk carries. A torpedo destroys one submarine once. An acoustic signature file and a demonstrated prosecution capability destroys the doctrine that submarine relies on. permanently. The IRGC just learned that their best shallow water stealth tactic, tanker acoustic masking, has a counter they did not account for. That lesson echoes through every future Ghadir patrol plan. The Ghadir breaks from the tanker shadow at 0329. There is no clean exit. To separate from the supertanker, it has to restart its diesel. And the moment that engine kicks over, the Monterey's bow sonar picks it up clearly. The ship that was invisible for 6 minutes is now, on every sensor, the loudest thing in the strait. The Arleigh does not give chase. The channel geometry at this position makes a surface prosecution inadvisable. Too many commercial vessels, too shallow for a torpedo-firing solution that would not risk the tanker. The Monterey's commanding officer makes the correct call. They already have what they need. The Ghadir surfaces in the shipping lane, not by choice, but because it has no depth to hide in, and runs on the surface toward the Iranian coast at maximum speed, which is roughly 11 knots. Every second of that transit is being tracked by the Seahawk, logged by the P-8A Poseidon now repositioning overhead, and fed into CENTCOM's picture via Link 16. The sub's tracks, speed, and heading are recorded in real time until it clears the shipping lane and enters Iranian territorial waters off Bandar Abbas. One detail that stuck with me going through the tactical logic of this scenario: the Ghadir's commander never made a targeting error. He never misread the geometry of his hide. He executed his doctrine correctly. He was betrayed by a physics gap in that doctrine, the assumption that the Thermocline was an impenetrable acoustic ceiling. The ANC QS-22 proved it was not. What this tells us about the broader situation in Hormuz is worth sitting with. The IRGC has invested heavily in asymmetric submarine capability. Small, cheap, numerous, hard to find. The Ghadir program is that investment. Against surface combatants alone, in shallow confined water, the concept has real merit. The math of one destroyer versus a bathtub full of mines and a minisub is not comfortable math for the surface fleet, but the Ghadir's kill chain depends on remaining undetected. Once it is classified and tracked, it loses every advantage it has. It cannot run, too slow. It cannot dive, too shallow. It cannot fight. 2 torpedoes against a Burke's ASROC magazine is not a duel. Its entire operational value is the threat of its presence, not the fact of its attack. And tonight, that threat has been precisely neutralized. Not by destroying the submarine, but by demonstrating that it cannot hide. The recording from the Seahawk's mission computer goes to the Naval Intelligence Database. The Ghadir's acoustic signature is logged, cataloged, and distributed. Every MH-60R, every P-8A, every SOSUS node in the region now has that fingerprint. The next time that hull goes to sea, or any hull with similar machinery characteristics, it will be recognized inside the first 15 minutes of a patrol. Here is the final point, and it is one that rarely gets stated clearly outside the anti-submarine warfare community. The diesel submarine's deadliest enemy is not the active ping. It is not the torpedo. It is the loss of the thermocline as a shield. In deep water, a diesel-electric submarine running on batteries below a thermal layer is genuinely one of the hardest targets in naval warfare. The noise floor is extraordinarily low. The thermal gradient defeats most hull sonar geometries. Detection ranges shrink to hundreds of meters. That is why diesel boats like the Ghadir are taken seriously by navies that outclass them on paper by orders of magnitude. But helicopters cheat. The dipping sonar does not look through the thermocline from above, it goes through it. The ANQS-22 operates in the shadow zone itself, where the submarine has no acoustic cover because it is sharing a frequency space with the sonar array. The physics that protect the submarine from the surface become irrelevant the moment the sonar is on the same side of the thermal layer as the target. And in 60 meters of water, there is no second layer to hide behind. The Ghadir found the ceiling of its own tactic and discovered it had been cracked open from below. That is deterrence, not a wreck, not a body count, a recording, a demonstrated capability, and a submarine commander who returns to Bandar Abbas, knowing that the game he thought he was winning was already over before he restarted his engine. Will the IRGC try this approach again? Maybe with modified acoustic damping, maybe with a different lane geometry, maybe with multiple submarines forcing the prosecution assets to split their attention. Comment yes or no, because that question shapes every future Seahawk tasking in the Strait. If you want to understand how the P-8A Poseidon's sonobuoy patterns actually work, the spacing, the frequency coordination, the difference between passive and active prosecution, that is the next breakdown. Hit subscribe so you do not miss it. And if this raised questions, drop them below. We read every single one.